Hey everyone, it's Andy, the young berry farmer, coming to you again from the little red shed here on the farm. And I wanted to start out this video just by stating the really obvious here, and that's that being a farmer is hard. It knew it was going to be hard before I started the farm a couple years ago, and I really know it now. And it doesn't matter what type of farmer you are. You could be a big farmer, you can be a small farmer, you can do fruits, you can do vegetables, corn, soy, animals. It really doesn't matter. The reality is it's tough to make a living farming across the board. However, recently it seems like it's getting harder. Environmental and economic pressures are making farming more unpredictable than ever before. The only thing you can really predict when it comes to the weather is that it's going to be wet and it's not going to be great. Since I have contacts over at the University of Minnesota who have told me that they think 25% of the fruit growers that they know in our state have gone out of business in the past 5 to 10 years. Our neighbors in Wisconsin, they lead the country in farm bankruptcies 2 years running, and it seems to be disproportionately affecting small farms, at least relative to the medium and larger size farms. So the question is, why then, right? How come the smaller farms are feeling this pressure more than larger farms? Our current Secretary of Agriculture is Sonny Perdue, and he tried to answer this question himself actually in Madison, Wisconsin on October 1st at the World Dairy Expo. And before I go into sort of my thoughts on what Sonny Perdue said, I'd really encourage everyone to click on a couple of the links below that I've included. I've provided multiple newspaper articles that seem to corroborate the statements that he said, and I encourage anyone to click on those links and take a look for yourself. Now, there's a lot to unpack from Sonny Perdue's comments here at the World Dairy Expo, but for the purposes of this video, I just want to hone in on two of his most important statements that I saw. And I have them written down here just to make sure I don't get them wrong. The first one is, in America, the big get bigger and the small go out. And the second one is, it's very difficult on an economy of scale with the capital needs and all of the environmental regulations that we have and everything else today to survive. And he meant surviving small. He was talking to dairy farmers, but he was really blanketing that out towards all small farmers in general. And that first statement, in America you go big or you get out, that one bothers me a little bit just because it seems to be preying on this sense of American exceptionalism or idealism that directly correlates size with success, right? And the hardworking American patriots, they always get bigger because they work harder, they're better, they're more successful. And the implication of that, obviously, is if you're smaller, that means that you don't work as hard, you're lazier, you're less successful, and maybe even less American. That bothers me a little bit, but not a whole lot, because it's just, blowharding, dumb rhetoric. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's the second statement that Perdue says, though, that I think is a bit more dangerous and misleading. And I'll keep it highlighted there on my fridge whiteboard. First of all, Perdue seems to be placing primary blame for the struggles of farmers and small farmers in particular on environmental regulations, and completely omits the much larger forces at work here, such as the environmental pressures that those regulations are actually trying to treat and mitigate, economic fallout from regular market forces and also the trade war, and federal agricultural budgets that seem to be designed to disproportionately assist large farms as opposed to small ones. But more on that later. Now, the real general interpretation of the economy of scale works like this, that every business, no matter if you're a farm, if you are a grocery store, if you are a computer store, doesn't really matter. You have your own set of operating expenses, and then you're also operating revenue, the money that you make total. And hopefully your revenue is more than your expenses, and that area in between is your profit. The idea of the economy of scale is that as your business or operation gets larger, the operating expenses don't increase as quickly as your revenue does. So that means that as you get larger, the gap between your revenue and your expenses is larger, which means that you get more profits. And thus, larger companies or larger size businesses will be better off than smaller scale businesses. And there are other reasons why it would be beneficial to be larger as well. On a farm, if I have more money, right, I can buy better tractor equipment that are more efficient, that doesn't take as long to maintain and may last a little bit longer too. So the economy of scale, it's fairly well known as just this idea that justifies that larger is better than smaller. Now it's this version or definition or interpretation of the economy of scale that I'm thinking Sonny Perdue is hoping that people use when they try and justify or explain why more small farms are going out of business than large farms. And I think this hope or this presentation of the economy of scale is working, because I did something that almost no one should ever do. It's not recommended in 99% of cases. I read through the comment section on a politically charged newspaper article, and it was terrible. But it did give me a good sense of what the general perception of this situation was, and it kind of goes like this. Well, I feel bad for these small farmers, but that's progress. This is what America looks like. The bigger are better able to compete in the free open marketplace, and because of that they can survive, and the small ones just can't cut it. I don't see why we have to spend our hard-earned tax dollars on subsidizing and helping these smaller farmers when they can't stand up on their own 2 feet. What's the point of giving them handouts when the other farms who are successful don't get any of it? And honestly, I understand why that perception exists. The dominant truth, though, is that in most cases the exact opposite is true. An average of $13 to $17 billion is spent on farm subsidies each year in the United States, and a massive proportion of that doesn't go to the small farms, but to the large ones. The top 10 ag subsidy recipients received almost $2 million a year annually from 2008 to 2017. The largest farm in my county received over $14 million in government subsidies over that same 10-year period. Now, these aren't small operations here. The largest average farm in my state of Minnesota are going to be your corn and soybean operations. And if you operated by the free market interpretation of the economy of scale, you'd think that these crops didn't need any subsidies because of their large size. It made them more able to compete in the free market. But corn and soy subsidies for our state totaled $15.6 billion from 1995 to 2019, which is 120 times more money than the only subsidy program that I qualify for as a small strawberry farmer, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Now, the most confusing thing for me here is that, at least when I think of subsidies, I sort of imagine emergency, maybe one-time government assistance doled out to individuals or organizations that are small, struggling, need the help in response to perhaps a disaster event. But the truth is, in the agricultural realm, that's not how the vast majority of it has worked. Most subsidies aren't paid based on how little you've grown or how much you've lost to disaster, but simply by how big you are or how much you can produce. A massive portion of the money doled out from the U.S. government to farmers in the past 25 years came in the form of direct payouts, where farms were cut a check relative to how much land they had regardless of what they did with it. Direct payouts were sort of cleverly rebranded in 2014 as something else called agricultural risk coverage. But no matter what you call it, though, the effect is similar, that the bigger you are, the more money you get from the government. So this is the economy of scale, actually, in agriculture, not what most people think. Not that the bigger you are, the better you're able to compete in the open market, but the bigger you are, the more cash you're allowed to get from your government. So I guess technically what Sonny Perdue said in Madison wasn't false. It was just true for completely different reasons than most people think. Now, I just want to emphasize here that I don't have an issue with corn and soy growers in general, even though it seems like I'm piling on them, or large farms categorically. They don't really bother me. What bothers me is when businessmen come in and try to mislead others on what's actually happening in my landscape, and saying that, some organizations are doing better than other organizations purely because of open market forces, when the truth and reality is much more complicated and subtle and complex than that. So you may be thinking right now, all right, Andy, you've laid all the data out in front of us, you've laid your perspective out in front of us, so what are you still complaining about? If you know that it's so much better to be big, why don't you just go out there and get bigger? And you can cut yourself a big old fat slice of that sweet, sweet government subsidy pie. And the answer is that's obviously not that easy. And even if it was, I think there's plenty of good reasons to stay as a small to medium-sized farm, even if the option to be large was out there. I think it's better for me. I think it can be better for the community too. And it's not just me. There was a 2000 study that found that rural communities that were surrounded by smaller farms had 55% average higher economic activity than rural communities that were supported or surrounded by larger farms. And the reason why this is that the smaller to medium-sized farms cycled all of their revenue, 95% of their revenue, right back into the community, whereas the larger farms only did maybe less than 20%. So having a more engaged, smaller farm environment seemed to be better, not just for the farms, but for the communities around the farms as well. Also, going big isn't just as easy as snapping your fingers and saying, okay, I'm big now. Agricultural land prices have been steadily increasing recently, actually over the course of several decades. It's very, very difficult for a new farmer, and especially a young farmer, to sort of crack into that landscape and acquire a whole lot of land for themselves. The easiest way to do it is, unfortunately, be a member of like a 4th or 5th generation farm already that has slowly accrued more land over the course of several decades when the land wasn't as relatively expensive, or to just be filthy rich to begin with and not matter how expensive the land is. Glenn Taylor, the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves, got over $120,000 in subsidies from his farm in Iowa last year. Glenn Taylor doesn't need $120,000 from the government. He can afford to pay Andrew Wiggins $28 million to go out there on the court and play the most inefficient basketball in the history of time. All right, we got a little distracted there. Let's circle it on back and get back to our main question, which was, why does it seem to be harder for small farms to stay afloat right now compared to larger farms? Now, once again, it's hard for any farm to survive today. But to me, based on everything that we've had laid out here, it seems like smaller farms are more susceptible to changes in these volatile market and environmental and economic forces because the larger farms have secured themselves a disproportionate amount of government assistance, even relative to their size. Now, am I mad at the large farms for enjoying these benefits? Part of me thinks no, right? You'd be dumb not to tap into that pie if it's being given freely out to you. What bugs me is that when we have a Secretary of Agriculture that's trying to attribute the bankruptcies in small farms purely to market forces and saying that we're less able to compete in the marketplace, when the reality is that it seems like we're just much less able to compete currently in the legislation room. So if you're Sonny Perdue and you're going to say go big or get out, please just be honest with yourself. Say what you're really thinking, which is be big or don't bother. All right, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. This was my first sort of angry video, and I really don't want to do a whole lot of these over the course of this channel, and I'm sure there's a bunch that I didn't cover. So if you have any sort of comments or thoughts or perspectives that I haven't talked about here, or maybe I haven't thought about, please put them in the comments below. If you want to see more videos of actual farm stuff, seeing what I'm doing, how it is to be a first-generation berry farmer, what it's like when most of the things that you're doing are for the first times ever, and you have to sort of figure it out on your own. A lot of it is just laughing at me doing stuff incorrectly. Give a follow, give a like, give a subscribe, and that's it. Yeah, I'm Andy, the young berry farmer, and have a good day.